Hey everybody, welcome to episode 22 of Building Jam. In this episode, we talk to Brian Lovin, who's the founder and CEO of Campsite. In this episode, we talk about everything design related, what it's like to be a design founder, what are the different paths for a designer, and how to hire an amazing unicorn designer. Let's get into it.
I have a first challenge to bring you, and then I'm sure that Chad and Irtefa have a ton. Not because I think they have challenges, but because I'm excited to hear what they have to say.
Let's go.
Okay, so one thing that's similar about both of our companies is that user experience is life or death. So if we build a great user experience and people decide to learn how to use our tools and they use it every day and they introduce it to their teammates and we earn the right to exist. And if one day we make that user experience frustrating, that's a startup sized gap in the market where someone can compete and win. And every time I see something from Campsite, I'm like, holy smokes, it's amazing. And I'm curious, sort of, as a designer, how you think about that and how, like advice you have for startups like yours and like how you do all that at Campsite.
Yeah, I think the unfair advantage that we have is we get to use our product to build our product. And I've oh I feel lucky that I've always gotten to do this. At every job I've worked at, I got to use the product, like Facebook, GitHub, my last startup Spectrum, and now Campsite. Use the thing to build the thing. And I think when you're dog fooding it every single day you live in the app, every paper cut just starts to weigh on you, or at the very least every paper cut is just such a clearly obvious thing that you can go fix yourself in 5 minutes. um, I've always had a lot of respect for people who build in industries or for audiences that they themselves do not like share that same problem. I think it requires a lot more time with the customer, a lot more calls, and like watching people do whatever session replays or just have people record their screens and get like try and see where people get frustrated and stuck and stuff is jumping around or janky or freezes or whatever it might be.
Can you talk about more about being design led company, design led founder? Like design is so core to Campsite. Like, are there design principles, product principles? Like, what guides the company and how you build it?
I think there's a couple of different designer personas. I very crudely bucket them into like capital D designers and lowercase d designers. Um, I'm a lowercase d designer, which means I really love like building beautiful software and iterating quickly, but I am not super like spiritual about design. You can just tell like when you meet certain designers, the way they talk about design, you're like, holy shit, you are a capital D designer. It's like almost academic in a sense. I in my experience, I think folks who end up at Apple like tend to fit that profile. There's like a really deep, profound way of thinking about design. I'm just not like that. And I had to kind of come to terms with that over my career. Maybe it'll change at some point. I don't know. But I just like building software and I like building beautiful software. Uh, but it's less about like giga braining some solution in a room for 2 years and then revealing it to the world, and more about like, here's an idea, I'm going to go refine this with people through 10,000 pull requests over the next 2 years, which feels scrappier. It almost feels a little bit, I don't know, like hacker-y. But that's the way I like to go about it. And so for us at Campsite is like, yes, we want it to be beautiful and polished, and every animation's at 60 frames per second, and transitions from the correct direction depending on where you clicked a trigger. Like those are certain principles that we want to get to. But day to day, like we actually focus more on solving the problem, getting the PR done. If it's better today than it was yesterday, ship it, even if what we have today isn't perfect. Um, so as far as like being a design founder, maybe it's just we can get to like a better looking or like better functioning solution quicker. Uh, but it's not about like going and designing the app and then revealing it to the world. In
Brian,
fact, we
I,
don't even
I,
have
I I
a
have,
Figma file really.
you said something really interesting there where you had to come to terms with it. Like, I
Yeah.
think when we interview like young designers, especially just like out of school, like there is a lot of like capital D designer energy coming off, right? Because you just finished your degree, and they haven't gone through that journey yet. So like, how do you how did you come to terms with, how do you figure out, okay, like this is what I'm actually really good at and this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I want to do?
I mean, I guess I tried it, right? Like I tried to be like the capital D designer, and like, um, I also think it's really influenced by where you live. I don't know, the stereotype of the San Francisco designer that wears all black and like, I don't know, walks around with like their tote bag with their MacBook. Like these stereotypes exist for a reason. I think as social creatures, we like want to emulate that or like fit in. And so I think probably that desire to fit into the capital D design crowd is, you feel it stronger in maybe San Francisco and New York than you would if you were working remotely for a company. So maybe that was a little bit what I mean of coming to terms with it, is like I've been in San Francisco for 10 years and you just like meet all these people and there's that social pull to, oh man, oh, they're doing that thing. Maybe I should try that way of working, or that way of thinking about design or talking about design. So that was a little bit of coming to terms with it. And then the other was, I don't know, like what do I get excited about when I wake up and want to go and work on software? And for me, the feedback loop is prototype something, show it to a customer, get feedback, and then make a change to it the next hour and show it to them again. And like that is what fills me with energy. I think going into a cave and like designing something in a Figma file or an origami file for a month at a time, I just hate it. I think it sucks. I think I start to overthink things. I fall into a little bit of analysis paralysis. Like you've looked at mocks for too long and you haven't forced that mock to encounter reality. I like encountering reality as quickly as possible, which just means shipping a little bit faster and being a little bit scrappier. Now, again, so much of this is like context dependent, right? Like we are also a very early stage company, so maybe it makes a lot of sense for us to be in that mode right now, and maybe it'll need to change. But certainly, this is like the most fun stage for me. So that was the other part of coming to terms with it, is like what actually gives me energy.
Can I zoom in on like inception of, I've said that word twice in this, on the beginning of like, hey, I got an idea, to I'm becoming a founder. Designers, especially young ones and folk that like don't have a multi-stack view, like the concept of design is so nuanced now that there's many different aspects to it that people might work in. But like getting from prototype, which you can do in Figma or whatever, to like something that you can play with and mess with is now easier because AI tools are out there, and like, I can build an app in a few hours. Thanks, Claude.
Yeah.
But how do you transition? How do you give a designer the confidence to actually take their idea and say, hey, I need technical help here. I need your time and hours, and I'm going to pay you money, or give you a portion of this because I think it's significant. Like, how do you get that conviction and that transition? I say this because I in the past have like stopped from becoming like doing my own business and help other people's with their own business, um, because I view my work as additive, but not the support structure, which is flawed in its own way. I'm seeing a therapist, but like just curious on your thoughts on this concept.
Okay, it's an interesting question. I actually am very interested in how AI will change this in the future. I can only speak to what I've done and what I've seen, and but I think to your point, AI is going to change all of this. Like who knows what's going to happen in the design tools themselves, but certainly like the code editors, Claude and Cursor and like all this kind of stuff is getting good at helping people design something good enough by default. I think I, I don't know where the boundary is quite yet. Um, for me, I think there's two things that stand out. One is you should just like work in the industry for a while, right? And I actually feel like this was a good thing for me to, Facebook was in person. I moved to San Francisco to be in person with the first startup I joined. Spectrum, we were only 3 people, but 2 of us were in person. Like just being around people and being around engineers is super helpful for two reasons. One is like you can actually start to absorb some engineering ideas and like try to prototype something and get feedback on it. And then the second is I think engineers, especially product minded, design minded ones, get excited to do this kind of thing. They don't view it as like a contract. They view it as like, oh, this sounds fun. I would love to just like jam on this, pun intended. So I think, yeah. So I think that's the first thing that stands out is just work in the industry and like make friends with people at your existing companies. I think quite often like your existing collaborators are great people to start a company with. You build shared context, understand how they work, how they think. So just as a concrete example, like my current co-founder, Ryan, he and I worked at GitHub together for 3.5 years on the mobile apps. And we spent a lot of time getting to know each other and understand how we think about things. And I learned a lot from him about engineering and systems and product and prioritization. And then hopefully the inverse for him with design as we built out the mobile apps. And then the second thing, I guess, which I maybe already kind of mentioned, is I think there's like a more engineers than you would expect who would be really happy to work on a side project with a good designer. Like I think a lot of engineers at their job, we call it shoveling snow, but the like more cynical way of saying is just like doing shit grunt work, right? There's a lot of snow shoveling at companies. Okay, go like build this CRUD interface to like update a database when someone fills out this form. It's like really boring stuff. So if you show them a new idea, clean slate, hey, you can like design the architecture. They're like, oh my god, it's like a hot tub for their brain. It's like such a relief from the day to day, right?
Brian, how do you think about design at Campsite? Like, why does it look the way it looks? Like, what's your intention with? How, what are the principles that guide this?
There's so much about it that I don't like. I don't like the way it works. I also think, I don't know, there's like an aesthetic that is very popular today that I think we also fall into, which is like pretty stark, minimal, like mostly flat, um, sidebar on the left, title bar on the top. Like, in fact, I, I got this DM this morning and someone was like, hey, I noticed that you guys are using the Shad CN UI kit. I'm like, oh, we don't use that, but we
Oh, it's
look
just in
like
the
it.
meme space. That's
Well,
amazing.
it's just like that is the aesthetic of the moment, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the era we are in. I would say like popularized by Vercel, by Linear. Maybe those two are like the strongest contenders for me. I guess a little bit of Apple as well, but certainly in the B2B space, I think Linear's had a lot of impact here. How do I think about it? I don't know, like just try and always simplify things. I think this is the thing that bugs me the most about Campsite is we've just been working on it for long enough that you add more buttons and you add more labels and you add all these little features that people have asked for at one point or another for good reason, and it just starts to clutter things.
Yes.
Yeah, one thing we did last week is we went through and just reevaluated some of our data about like, oh, we built this thing a year ago because a lot of people were asking for it. Do people still use it? And we found like 5 things. It's like nobody uses it. 2 people used it in the last 30 days. We're like, rip it out. Doesn't matter.
That's
Just
amazing.
kill it. And you feel this like weight lifted off your shoulders. There's just something so viscerally satisfying about not only deleting code, but like deleting part of the UI that just didn't matter.
Brian,
So
can I get your
yeah.
advice on something?
Yeah, sure.
We have this problem too. So the thing that currently works about Jam is it's really simple.
Yeah.
And before we hit product market fit, the thing that didn't work about Jam was that it was too complicated. There were
Yeah.
too many features.
Mm,
And actually it was when we started removing all the features that things started to work.
yeah.
One of the features that we removed is the ability to sort of like track issues in Jam, where like Jira turns out to be a little bit too heavy for some things, but Slack is like a little bit too light. And so we're like, okay, let's give people tracking abilities for issues that's somewhere between a spreadsheet and a Jira. And it made perfect sense at the time. People used it, but it made the product feel very heavy. And then once we removed all that, the product felt light and it took off. And now people are asking us for tracking abilities again. And I
Yeah.
feel afraid.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I will never tell Chad, let's add it, like design this feature, because I'm terrified that we're going to make it clunky again.
Hmm.
Anyway, how do you think about this? Any advice?
Oh man, I want to hear what you figure out. We're kind of going through something similar. So for context, like we spent the last 8 months building this like fully featured end-to-end team collaboration platform, and so that included we built our own call system, we built our own docs, we built our own chat, we built all this stuff, and it really, really works for people who want to go all in. That typically is early stage startups. But the painful part of that, what we found is there's a lot of people who want a subset of that functionality, and they feel like if they don't use everything, then they're not getting the full value of the product. Therefore, the product is not for them. And so, anyways, I actually don't have the answer where you've like, it sounds like you went through that, you simplified, and now you're still just like going through the loop yet again. One phrase that I come back to a lot though is this idea of spiraling towards the truth. I think this like the way that software gets built is quite often you go in circles and it feels like you're doing the same shit over and over again. You're like, I've done this. We've already built issue tracking. Why are we doing this again? The difference will be you did it once, you learned a lot, you talked to a lot of customers, and now when you're doing it again, you'll actually do it better with a fresh perspective. You'll maybe have a better understanding of how it integrates into the product, or like which functionality around issues actually mattered and what didn't. And I guess spiraling towards the truth is maybe just a different way of phrasing like the midwit meme, right? Is like I think all software is just like constantly going up and down the midwit meme chart. And the important thing about that is every time you come out on the right side of that chart, you have a deeper understanding of what you're actually trying to accomplish. So I don't really have advice except to say like it sounds like if you were to do issues again, you will do it better than you did the first time, or at least with a deeper understanding of what people are trying to accomplish now that like the core thing is really, really working and resonating with people. As far as like actual strategies, I don't know. You see like some people build, they'll either go multi-product. What's a good example of this? Maybe like Figma is a good example of this, I think, right? Like there's Figma slides, there's Fig Jam, there's Figma files, and they like kind of work together. Maybe Figma slides and Figma files are the closest, but for a while, like they didn't really work together. And people were like, why can't I have a page in a Figma file that is a Fig Jam? Why can't I just have those two things in one place? Um, anyways, Figma made the decision to keep those split. So I think that's one way you could go about it. I think Intercom is another good example of this, where like you can kind of buy a job to be done on Intercom, and it just like adds
Ha,
an icon to the sidebar.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, you do that for too long, and you're just going to circle back around to the very start of that spiral, and it's gonna be like, okay, now we have like 50 things in the sidebar, too many products, they don't all work together, they don't share similar data models, or even like design language, right? So then you're going to have to redo all of that.
Brian, I have a hypothesis, and I'm sure we'll know about it more as we spiral towards it.
Yeah.
So as you're talking about, how like you all build this team collaboration platform, and there are like some features that are being used by people, but some are not. And I think that is the key thing where when we think about like adding more issue tracking or like organization type of stuff, it doesn't satisfy everyone. Not everyone needs it, but a subset of people need it. And I think Intercom did it the right way where they're not, it's not part of everything, but if you want this extra thing, you can like buy it. And I think
Right.
that's something that we should probably like test,
It's so
and
smart.
keep the core product super simple.
Right. Buy the issue tracking add-on on top.
Yeah.
Oh my
Maybe.
God, that's exactly what we should do.
Maybe. I mean, it's a thing you could try, right? And like see how it feels. What's the other path? Like we had a meme at GitHub called Rem checkboxes, which is essentially this idea that GitHub is really just a series of checkboxes. Like if you've ever gone to the GitHub settings for your account or for a repository, there are a billion settings. and there are subsettings for each of those billion settings. It gets really, really complex. And the beautiful thing about that system is every organization can create the GitHub experience that they need for their type of company, for their security preferences, for their workflow preferences. The downside of that, of course, is it is incredibly hard to design and build for. You are just constantly thinking about what are all of the potential states that this thing could end up in. The best example that comes to mind for me is I think they called it the combo box, which is basically like at the bottom of a pull request where it shows, reviews, passing, checks, passing, like safe to merge, and you get this very satisfying column of green buttons, and then there's a button to merge. That component is insane. Like there is so much code backing that because there's 1,000 checkboxes that determine when you're allowed to merge code into different apps. So what GitHub did, they went the opposite way, I think, which is there's not multiple products, there's just preferences. And what they do and what we did is how do you design the most sane defaults? Like what are the defaults that we provide to everybody that hopefully give them a successful experience out of the box, and then power users can sort of eject. So for issues, I wonder if I guess that's a similar idea to like progressive disclosure, right? Like, is there a way to opt into the more complex functionality when you need it? Yeah, maybe Slack does this too, right? Like, I think Slack starts very simply with there's just channels, and then I think as you like climb up the enterprise chain, you get into like there's like multi-org channels, and then like there's like multi-workspace enterprises and so on and so forth, and you just get into this like wrapping of container on container on container. I think Facebook has this with Facebook ads. Like the default experience is fine, but as you like level up your organizational complexity, you sort of opt into the more advanced hierarchy and structure, and basically just add like toolbars and title bars around everything for each layer of hierarchy. Look, I think either way you go, the reality is like as you add stuff to software, it's just going to become more complicated and hard to explain to people. And hopefully you can just like refine your way through it and keep things simple as long as possible. Like frankly,
Keep spiraling.
even the things that keep spiraling, but like even the things that start out as like revered, beloved tools, like 5 years later are almost always unrecognizable because they've just added stuff that people asked for. And then the new startup comes along and it's the fresh take, the simple take on like one of
Right.
those sub
Jira.
jobs. Yeah.
In our last 5 minutes, Brian, the hardest role to hire for a jam so far, 4.5 years in, has been design.
Oh, okay.
And every time we're looking for a designer, we tell people like we're looking for this type of designer, and everyone tells us that's a unicorn.
Yeah.
That's going to be really hard to find.
I already know what your job description looks like. Yeah.
Advice for founders on hiring designers. What should we all know? How do we do this?
Oh boy. I think you really need to like break down what you're saying when you say you need a designer, because I think everyone's picturing something different. Even on this call, we're all probably picturing something slightly different. I think there's some people who want the designer who can also redo their logo and like redo the marketing page. That's a very different designer than someone who's going to come in and like deeply prototype a particular interaction, or is going to be writing CSS to make things like feel really refined and polished and beautiful. And then of course there's just different, even within each of those, there's the designer who is incredible at like going and being proactive about talking to users and like synthesizing feedback and turning that into like a product proposal. And then maybe there's on the other side people who are just like incredible visual designers, and they can take that proposal and just turn it into a gorgeous Figma file. I think that what you're saying, I imagine you're looking for someone who can kind of do a little bit of all of those things, right? Which is where you get into the unicorn territory. I think you might, man, it depends on the stage too, but you might consider like breaking it up. Like, are you actually trying to hire two different kinds of designers that would complement each other really well? I had a really great relationship with the designer at GitHub. Her name's Kathy. And the way I thought about our relationship, I don't know if she would say the same thing, but she was like the fun designer. She was really good at telling a story and making interfaces that felt friendly and approachable and had character and personality. And I'm really good at the like utilitarian stuff. I'm like, I'm going to make this button look great. And like, there's going to be structure and consistent padding and like all this kind of stuff. And so we just partnered on stuff and we made a lot of really cool, fun things together. So there might be an opportunity where actually you need two people who complement each other. And I also find that the marketing and product divide, it doesn't, you can find people who are good at both, but I find that that's like a kind of helpful divide. There's just a different skill set in communication design on a landing page than there is in like information architecture within a product. Like, how do you design like a consistent, coherent navigation across like a complex system versus like telling a beautiful, simple story with a couple of accompanying graphics in a video? So I kind of view those as different kinds of people. I mean, and then if I were to put myself in your shoes as like, hey, we build tools for developers, like you should probably hire a designer who codes or like at least has enough agency to go and like try Cursor or like try Copilot and like understand the feeling that your customers feel when they are reporting and fixing bugs, right? I think if you couldn't do that, that would be like probably a miss from just a customer empathy point of view.
Your point on like you think you're making one hire but you're making two is very interesting. I'm running into this logical fallacy right now where we're growing our marketing team by one person, and it's I tell everyone it's two roles in one. It's product launches and then it's growth campaigns. And everyone I talk to is like, so you're hiring two people, and I'm like, no, I'm looking for a person who can do both. But it turns out brains work in certain ways, and anyway, I think maybe that's the logical fallacy that's made it hard to hire design and this role, and I think maybe you're right.
The other thing I'd say is like unicorns do exist. There are people who can do both of these things, and it just comes down to like your patience and are you willing to pay them.
I feel like we're spiraling.
Yeah, we are spiraling. But like a good example of this,
Spiral unicorn horn.
I think Jason Long is a really good example of this. He was, I think, like the first designer at GitHub, if not like one of the first couple. And this guy's super under the radar, but he like designed everything. He touched every part of GitHub from brand to iconography. I think he did marketing work, he did product work, he did design systems work, just like totally across the board. He exists. Now he's at Planet Scale doing the same thing, like everything from scratch. So much is just his brain manifested in Planet Scale's brand and product and marketing. So I mentioned that to say these people exist. They're just incredibly hard to find, but findable. It's not an unsolvable problem.
Brian, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
This was fun. Yeah.
This was so fun.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for the conversation and the questions.